Hi, Rod Fleming here. Welcome to this episode. Today we're going to be talking about the history of feminized boys, of ladyboys, that is, trans women in the more traditional sense, that is, in the main, homosexual transsexuals. Ladyboys in history. All ladyboys are feminized boys, but this is not a recent phenomenon. In Imperial China, boy actors called Dan played feminine roles on stage, in society, and in bed. These were the product of formalized training and education, and they were numerous, with more Dan being active in Beijing in some periods than female courtesans. The Dan were specifically sought out by their male partners, who considered their expression of beauty to be more desirable than that of women. The most beautiful had poems and songs written for them, and their portraits were painted. Often they entered relationships with men that might last for years, but more commonly they were retired when they became masculine. To prevent this, and around about the age of 14, the most beautiful were castrated. This was very common. We'll come across this particular issue again. What would happen in these cultures is that because they didn't really have access to powerful enough feminizing hormone therapy, they simply had the snip. They cut off the balls. There were various ways of doing it, but essentially that's what was happened. In most cases, the penis was left in place. The castration in these cases was only to remove the testicles and stop the effective testosterone. The full job, when it's all removed, is called emasculation. This is castration, which is just the removal or destruction of the testicles. So, feminine boys played the social and sexual roles of women in these societies, just as baklas and ladyboys and their other equivalents do today. These boys, recruited at the ages of 5 to 10, after years of training and often castration, became highly prized as courtesans. Powerful men provided them to their guests at banquets to show their wealth. For example, the boys could be selected if they had an unblemished appearance, to which was added training in speech, gait and gaze. After rising early in the morning, the boys washed their faces with light grease, after which they were fed soup made with egg whites. Then they breakfasted on a portion of choice morsels. At night an ointment was applied all over their body, leaving the feet and hands so that body heat could escape. After 3 months, the boy's appearance was as lovely and fair as that of a young maiden. When they looked over their shoulders, the effect was charming beyond belief. That's a quote from Kun Kun Wu, Homoerotic Sensibilities in Late Imperial China. It's a very interesting book, you should get it. This preference for feminine boys, at least amongst the educated class, or literati, was not because of a shortage of female sex workers, but because they were considered more beautiful and therefore more perfect. For a man to fall in love with a woman was regarded as somewhat demeaning, while doing so with a beautiful boy was seen as the pinnacle of good taste, both commendable and proper. And here's another quote. There are official prostitutes to entertain the guests at feasts in the Tang and Song dynasties. This is never permitted during our dynasty unless the entertainers are song boys, getong. However, there's a popular saying, song boys never sing, although they are called song boys. When entertaining guests, they were only required to announce the menus and urge guests to drink. The Jiao Chang catamites who lived in Lotus Seed Lane were the equivalent of prostitutes. Some admirers even slept with them on a regular basis. And I think you can see here the similarity between this particular lifestyle and the ladyboy lifestyle that we would see in Southeast Asia today, and elsewhere, even in China now again. In previous centuries, these courtesans would have been feminized boys who presented as women. In China and Japan, they were often actors or performers, though the performance that mattered was that of beauty and sex appeal. In Peking, for example, many government officials would no more serve a dinner without lovely catamites than would serve a dinner today without wine, especially if it was a festive occasion and the guests important personages. These entertainers were feminized and completely dressed and coiffed as girls. Their erotic teasing and coquetry was almost entirely feminine in nature. The actors provided by restaurants for their patrons were all from opera troupes in the near vicinity. Most were run-of-the-mill actors from the earlier sessions of the day. If men wanted to impress their guests, however, they were able to send for more popular Dan, the boy actors. It was not uncommon for the Du, who was the patron, and the Dan to form bonds based on a continuing familiarity, sometimes amounting to a love affair. So again, we see this today. This is what we see. In ladyboy cultures, this is here in the Philippines, it's called kabaklaan, in this part of the Philippines anyway. What happens is that, yes, many ladyboys will behave as prostitutes and they will have casual sexual affairs with men. But what they seek is to establish long-term affairs, long-term arrangements, which will last for years. In fact, they're constantly looking for what they call my lifetime partner. And yeah, I hope they find him. It is hard, coming from a modern Anglo-Western cultural background, with all the Apollonian ideas that implies, to fully grasp the nature of this attraction. It is certainly not homosexual, since the men involved were not attracted to masculinity, but to beauty, which is femininity. It seems rather that the Dan, and by the implication, baklas and their equivalents today, who perform a similar role in contemporary Asian culture, were more feminine than women. There is a presumption that what is beautiful must not only be feminine, but also female. But this is not always the case. Males can be beautiful and feminine too. Male erotic targeting systems do not separate these, especially when there are no recognizable external clues. Men are attracted to passing ladyboys as women. In her performance of beauty, the ladyboy may be creating an illusion, but it's quite enough to trigger a man's desire. A pretty boy who makes the right career moves and staves off masculinization can become a perfect manifestation of beauty, and so the target of male desire as a woman. And, I have shown you pictures of a large number of incredibly beautiful baklas, ladyboys, from the Philippines and Thailand, and these girls are stunningly gorgeous and incredibly feminine. They are indeed perfect manifestations of beauty. This is something that would once have been considered completely normal in the West. All of Shakespeare's women were intended to be played by boys, suitably feminized. Some of his sonnets, amongst the most highly vaunted of English verse, were written to a boy. And his most romantic feminine character, Juliet, still an icon today, was originally performed by one. Yet even lovers of the bard usually fail to recognize that all of his women were actually boys. A comedy like The Taming of the Shrew, for example, which is about a determined and outspoken girl who resists the attentions of her suitors, changes from a light comedy of manners into an outrageous body stream of horse laughs when you realize that the girl being so assiduously courted is actually a boy. Consider the scope for naughty asides, knowingly breaking the fourth wall, sexual innuendo, and general ribaldry, until very recently a mainstay of English humour, that this afforded. Lewd winks and gestures, the sort of thing that would reappear in pantomime, not to mention a string of Ealing comedies, would have had the audience in stitches. And here's a quote on that. It is truly strange that Shakespeare's great romantic tragedies could have become so popular with all the parts being played by males. A true testament to the power of theatre is that a tender and moving speech from a man to a woman could in fact be delivered by a man to a boy, and that this could be so easily overlooked. The love of feminized boys was ubiquitous in Shakespeare's time. King James VI and I, he for whom Macbeth was written, with its anti-heroine, also played by a boy, was an ardent pursuer throughout his life, and he was not a rare example either. Do you imagine that a sexual practice indulged by the king was not also by others? Pretty boys in dresses might have tickled the contemporary male fancy rather well, and we should not gloss over the likelihood that, as girls, these boy actresses would have sought generous male lovers themselves. Across Europe, similar sensibilities were normal, indeed culturally imposed, partly by the fact that women were generally inaccessible. It was considered natural until the 18th century in England and later elsewhere for men to be attracted both to women and to feminized boys. Beauty takes on a new meaning, a new poignancy, a new and powerful attraction when you realize that the person performing it, whether that be the cute bakla at the market stall, the glamorous pageant queen, the model whose face and body grace the glossy women's magazines, or the archly sexual courtesan, is actually male.